You think poor fishermen only ate whatever they caught that day? Think again. These coastal communities served up some of the most resourceful, ingenious, and surprisingly satisfying meals in working-class history. Let's dig into 25 forgotten fishermen's recipes our grandparents ate to survive, dishes that turned poverty into perseverance, one meal at a time. Fish head soup, the meal that separated the wasteful from the wise. Along the New England coast, from the 1880s through the Great Depression, fishing families lived by a sacred rule: use everything or starve. While wealthy city folks demanded only pristine fillets, fishermen's wives knew the head-held treasures the rich would never taste. Those gelatinous cheeks, the tender meat behind the gills, and that nutrient-packed brain matter weren't scraps. Grandma would split cod or haddock heads down the middle, simmer them for hours with onions, potatoes, and carrots until the broth turned cloudy white with fish oils and collagen. Every morsel of meat got picked from the skull's crevices and returned to the pot. A splash of cream if you were lucky, black pepper, and dried thyme finished it. This wasn't just thrifty cooking, it was maritime medicine that cured weak bones and winter colds. Today's bone broth craze is just fish head soup wearing expensive clothes. Fried salt herring and onions. Breakfast that hit your stomach like an anchor and kept you working till sunset. From the 1850s through World War II, Atlantic coast fishermen relied on salt herring like landlubbers relied on bacon. When refrigeration meant a wooden icebox, salt-preserved herring lasted months in barrel brine. You'd soak the stiff herring overnight to draw out enough salt that it wouldn't kill you, then split it and remove the spine. Thick onion slices sweated in bacon grease until golden, then the herring went in skin side down, crisping until the edges curled black and smoky. The smell announced breakfast 3 houses down, that pungent, oceanic, aggressive aroma that separated fishermen's families from landlocked folk. Kids grew up on this, their lunch pails reeking of herring all through school. It marked you as working class, as coastal, as someone who understood that survival came from the sea's bounty, preserved against scarcity. Codfish cakes. When you could transform yesterday's leftover fish into tomorrow's hot meal. These golden patties fed New England families from the 1700s right through the 1960s. Salt cod arrived in wooden barrels from Newfoundland's Grand Banks, cheap enough that even the poorest fishing family could afford it. You'd soak rock-hard salt cod for a day, changing the water constantly to leach out the preserving salt. Once reconstituted, you'd simmer it until tender, shred it fine, and mix it with mashed potatoes, a beaten egg if the chickens cooperated, minced onion, and black pepper. Shape into palm-sized patties, dust in cornmeal, and fry until both sides turned crispy brown with lacy edges. These cakes meant flexibility in uncertain times. Make them thick for dinner's main protein. Make them thin for sandwiches. Feed unexpected guests without shame. Modern crab cakes owe everything to these working-class cod cakes. Fish chowder, the communal pot that turned scraps into something that felt like abundance. Every fishing village from Maine to Nova Scotia had its chowder matriarch from the 1700s through the Depression era. You started with salt pork, dicing it fine and rendering it until the fat ran clear. In that blessed fat, onions sweated until translucent. Potatoes came next, cubed small and simmered until tender. Whatever fish the day provided, haddock, cod, pollock, hake, got cut into chunks and added gently, cooking just until opaque and flaky. Whole milk or cream went in last, heated through but never boiled, or it would curdle. The chowder thickened naturally from potato starch and fish proteins. Salt, pepper, and those reserved pork cracklings topped each bowl. This dish announced community survival, a pot that stretched to feed whoever needed it. One fish could feed 8 people when chowder was involved. Cornmeal crusted catfish, southern river fishermen's answer to expensive breading. From Louisiana bayous to Mississippi riverbanks, poor fishing families from the 1880s through the 1950s made catfish the centerpiece of survival cuisine. Catfish were bottom feeders that anyone could catch with basic tackle, making them democracy's fish. The trick was making them taste intentional, not desperate. You'd clean the catfish, removing that tough skin and trimming the fatty belly meat. The fillets got dunked in buttermilk if you had a cow, or just salted water if you didn't. Meanwhile, yellow cornmeal mixed with salt, black pepper, cayenne if the garden produced peppers, and maybe garlic powder got piled on a plate. Fried smelts, the tiny fish that taught children the meaning of abundance. Along the Great Lakes and both coasts during spring, smelt runs from the 1900s through the 1970s. These silver minnows arrived in such numbers that even the poorest families could fill buckets. Kids waded into cold streams with nets, catching hundreds in an hour. The beauty of smelts was their size. So small you ate them whole, bones and all. You'd clean them quickly, just a slit to remove the guts, rinse, and pat dry. A simple dredge through seasoned flour, then straight into hot fat. They fried in minutes, curling slightly, turning golden crisp. You'd pile them on newspaper, salt them heavy, and eat them with your fingers like popcorn. The bones dissolved on your tongue, the meat tasted sweet and mild. Families would fry 50, 100 at a time, and for one glorious night, everyone ate until full. It was the ocean's gift to the poor. Pickled herring on bread, the lunch that required no cooking and lasted all week. Scandinavian and German fishing communities brought this tradition to American shores in the 1800s, and it became the working man's meal through the 1960s. Herring preserved in vinegar brine with onions, bay leaves, and pickling spices kept in cool cellars for months. A working fisherman could pack this lunch in 5 seconds. Grab a jar, grab bread, grab a fork. At noon, you'd fork out cold herring fillets, lay them on thick slices of rye or sourdough, top with the pickled onions, and eat it open-faced. The vinegar's tang cut through the fish's richness, the onions added bite, and the bread soaked up the brine. It required no fire, no preparation, no fuss. Your hands stayed clean enough to keep working. The taste was sharp, briny, complex, working-class sophistication that cost pennies. Today's fancy charcuterie boards featuring pickled fish are just dressed-up poverty meals. Fish and potato hash, Monday morning's answer to Sunday's leftover fish. From the 1890s through the 1950s, coastal families transformed weekend fish scraps into weekday breakfast fuel. Nothing got wasted in a fisherman's household. You'd dice leftover boiled or fried fish into small pieces, removing any bones you found. Cold boiled potatoes got cubed to match. In a hot skillet with bacon fat or butter, diced onions cooked until soft. The potatoes went in next, pressed flat and left alone to develop a crispy bottom crust, that golden, crunchy layer that made hash worth eating. After 5 minutes, you'd break up the crust, fold in the fish, season with salt and pepper, and cook until everything heated through and new crispy bits formed. Some families cracked eggs on top and covered the skillet until the whites set. This hash announced kitchen competence, the ability to make yesterday's dinner into today's satisfaction. It stuck to your ribs through hard physical labor. Fish stew with rice, the Low Country's one-pot salvation during lean times. From South Carolina to Georgia's coast, Gullah fishing communities perfected this dish from the 1700s onward, blending West African cooking wisdom with New World ingredients. When the catch was small but the family was large, rice stretched everything. You'd start with the Holy Trinity: onions, celery, and bell peppers if the garden cooperated, sweating them in whatever fat you had. Tomatoes came next, fresh in summer or canned in winter, breaking down into a tangy base. Water or fish stock, rice, and whatever seafood the day provided. Small fish, shrimp heads, crab pieces, anything that swam. The rice absorbed every flavor as it simmered, swelling with the stew's essence. Hot sauce and filet powder finished it. This wasn't just food, it was cultural preservation, African culinary knowledge adapted to American shores. The rice turned creamy from the fish's natural gelatin, creating a texture somewhere between soup and porridge. One pot fed 8 people. Clam and potato soup. The soup that announced a low tide was productive. Along the Atlantic coast from the 1800s through the mid-1900s, families collected clams during a low tide, filling buckets with these free protein sources buried in the sand. Kids learned to spot the air holes and dig fast before the clam burrowed deeper. Back home, the clams got scrubbed clean of sand and grit. Into boiling water they went, steaming open, their liquor mixing with the cooking water to create instant seafood stock. You'd remove the clam meat, chop it fine, and strain the broth through cheesecloth to catch any sand. In that precious broth, diced potatoes simmered until tender, maybe with onions and celery. The chopped clams went back in just before serving, cooking only enough to warm through. Overcooking turned them to rubber. Salt pork or bacon added richness if you could afford it. This soup tasted like the ocean's generosity, briny and pure, proving that low tide blessed the poor. Canned sardine sandwiches. The Depression-era lunch that cost a nickel and filled a stomach. When fresh fish was a luxury and sardine tins flooded store shelves from the 1920s through the 1950s, these little preserved fish became working-class salvation. A tin of sardines packed in oil cost less than fresh bread. You'd crack open that tin, and the smell, intense, oily, unapologetically fishy, filled the kitchen. Fork the sardines onto bread, mash them slightly, add thin sliced onions if you had them, maybe a squeeze of lemon or splash of vinegar to cut the richness. Some families added mustard, others hot sauce. The oil from the tin soaked into the bread, making it soft and rich. These sandwiches appeared in lunch pails across fishing communities, fish canneries, and dockwork sites. They marked you as practical, as someone who understood protein was protein, regardless of presentation. No shame, just sustenance. Today's fancy tinned fish trend is just poverty food repackaged for people who've never been hungry. Fish roe patties, the delicacy the poor ate before the rich discovered it. From the 1800s through the 1940s, fishing families harvested roe sacks from any fish they caught. Shad, herring, cod, even catfish. While wealthy folks paid for imported caviar, fishermen's wives turned free roe into crispy patties. You'd carefully remove the intact roe sacks, rinse them gently, and dust them in seasoned cornmeal or flour. Into hot fat they went, frying until the membrane turned golden and crispy, while the eggs inside stayed creamy. The texture was remarkable, that satisfying pop as you bit through the sack, then the burst of tiny eggs, slightly fishy, rich with ocean minerals. Some families scrambled the roe with eggs, others pan-fried whole sacks and served them on toast. This dish represented the fisherman's advantage, first access to parts others never saw. The roe's high-fat content provided crucial calories during winter. It was brain food before anyone understood omega fatty acids. Pure, nutritious, and absolutely free if you caught the fish yourself. Boiled cod and cabbage. Irish and Scottish fishing families brought this stark, honest meal to North America's shores in the 1700s. Through economic depressions and brutal winters, this combination kept communities alive. The dish required only 3 ingredients: salt cod, cabbage, and water. You'd soak the salt cod overnight to remove excess brine, then simmer it in fresh water until tender and flaky. In the same pot, quartered cabbage cooked in that cod-flavored water, absorbing the fish's essence while releasing its own sweetness. Both emerged plain, pale, unadorned, food stripped to its fundamental purpose. You'd plate the fish and cabbage together, maybe adding a pat of butter if fortune smiled, black pepper if the spice box wasn't empty. The taste was clean, simple, oceanic. This wasn't cooking to impress, it was cooking to survive. The cabbage's fiber prevented the constipation that plagued fish-heavy diets. The cod provided protein and salt. Together, they represented maritime endurance, meals that asked nothing of you except the will to continue. Fried oyster loaf. The Gulf Coast peacemaker that turned cheap bivalves into sandwich royalty. From Louisiana to Texas during the late 1800s through the 1950s, oyster luggers harvested these filter feeders by the ton, selling them so cheap that even poor families could afford them. The name peacemaker came from husbands bringing this sandwich home after a night drinking, hoping to pacify angry wives. You'd shuck fresh oysters, toss them in seasoned cornmeal and flour, and fry them in hot oil until golden and crispy. Meanwhile, a small loaf of French bread got hollowed out, the soft interior removed. The fried oysters piled into that crusty shell, sometimes with shredded lettuce, sliced tomatoes, and hot sauce or remoulade if you were fancy. The contrast was magnificent, crackling oyster exterior giving way to warm, briny meat, all cushioned by bread that soaked up the frying oil. This sandwich announced Gulf Coast identity, a regional signature that required only local ingredients. It fed dock workers, fishermen, and cannery employees by the thousands. Salt cod and tomatoes. The Mediterranean answer transplanted to American fishing towns. Italian and Portuguese fishing families brought this dish across the Atlantic in the late 1800s, and it thrived in coastal communities through the mid-1900s. You'd rehydrate salt cod through multiple water changes, then break it into chunks. In olive oil, or whatever oil you could afford, garlic cloves sizzled until fragrant. Canned or fresh tomatoes went in next, breaking down into a thick, slightly sweet sauce. The cod simmered in this tomato bath, absorbing the flavors while releasing its own oceanic essence. Some families added olives, capers, or hot peppers if the pantry allowed. Fish cakes with gravy. When stretching Friday's fish into Saturday's supper required creativity and cream. From the 1920s through the 1960s, this dish appeared on tables across fishing communities, especially among families who couldn't afford fresh fish daily. You'd make basic fish cakes from leftover cooked fish mixed with mashed potatoes, shape them into patties, and fry them until crispy. The magic happened next. In the same skillet, you'd add a spoonful of flour to the remaining fat, stirring until it formed a roux. Slowly, milk went in, whisked constantly to prevent lumps, creating a thick white gravy. Salt, pepper, and maybe dried parsley seasoned it. Those fish cakes got plated and smothered in that creamy gravy, transforming them from simple cakes into a complete meal. The gravy added richness and moisture, making everything slide down easy. This was comfort food born from necessity, proof that even the poorest cook could create something that felt abundant. The gravy said you had standards, that poverty didn't mean eating dry, plain food. Dried fish and cornbread, the Appalachian fisherman's winter staple when fresh was impossible. From mountain streams to coastal plains during the 1800s through the Depression era, dried fish lasted months without refrigeration. You'd salt cure whole small fish or fillets, hanging them in the smokehouse, or even just in the rafters until they turned hard and jerky-like. Come winter, you'd break off pieces, rehydrate them slightly in warm water, and pan-fry them with onions. Alongside came cornbread, that dense, slightly sweet bread made from cornmeal, buttermilk, and bacon drippings baked in a cast-iron skillet until the bottom formed a dark, crispy crust. You'd crumble the cornbread into the fish and onions, letting it absorb the cooking fat and fish oils. Some families added pot liquor or milk to make it more like a stew. This combination provided carbohydrates, protein, and enough salt to make you thirsty for a week. It kept loggers, miners, and rural workers fueled through brutal winters when fresh food vanished. Canned tuna noodle bake, the 1950s casserole that pretended you weren't poor. When post-war America's economy boomed, but fishing families still struggled, canned tuna became the affordable protein that let mothers serve something that looked middle class. This dish required a can of tuna, egg noodles, canned cream of mushroom soup, and maybe some frozen peas if the budget stretched. You'd boil the noodles, drain them, mix everything together in a casserole dish, top with crushed crackers or potato chips, and bake until bubbly. The result was hot, filling, creamy, and tasted like American optimism. Kids actually liked it. It could be served to guests without shame. Church potlucks welcomed it. This casserole represented upward mobility, or at least the appearance of it. The canned soup provided cheap creaminess, the tuna added protein, and the crispy topping created textural interest. It wasn't fancy, but it announced you were trying, that you understood modern convenience foods and could make them work. $3 fed a family of 6. Fisherman's stew, the catch-all that literally used whatever the catch was. From Mediterranean fishing villages to American coast ports during the 1700s through today, this stew follows one rule: use what you have. Bad weather meant small catches of mixed fish, some rockfish, a few crabs, maybe squid, possibly mussels clinging to nets. Nothing matched, nothing was choice. Into a heavy pot went olive oil or whatever fat existed, onions, garlic, and tomatoes, creating the aromatic base. Fish stock or just water, then every piece of seafood in stages based on cooking time. Firm fish first, delicate fish last, shellfish in their shells for extra flavor. Wine if someone had a bottle, hot peppers if the garden produced. This stew announced community, because when catches were bad, families pooled resources, everyone contributing something to a shared pot. The result was briny, complex, deeply oceanic, a taste that couldn't be replicated with single ingredients. It represented maritime democracy and the understanding that survival sometimes meant sharing scarcity. Mackerel fried in bacon fat, the oily fish that required another fat to make it palatable. From the 1800s through the 1960s, mackerel were so abundant and cheap that fishing families relied on them despite their strong flavor. Fresh mackerel spoiled fast, so you cooked them the day they were caught. The trick was balance. Mackerel's natural oils needed something savory and smoky to cut through. Bacon fat was the answer. You'd fry bacon until crisp, remove it, then lay cleaned mackerel fillets in that shimmering, smoky fat. The fish sizzled and spat, its own oils mixing with the pork fat. You'd fry until the skin crisped and blackened slightly, the meat just cooked through. Haddock and onions. Simple to the point of Spartan, satisfying to the point of sufficiency. New England fishing families from the 1700s through the mid-1900s elevated this two-ingredient dish through technique and timing. Haddock was the working-class whitefish, cheaper than cod, but just as reliable. You'd fillet the fish, leaving the skin on for structure. In a cast-iron skillet, sliced onions cooked low and slow in butter or salt pork fat until they collapsed into sweet golden strands. The haddock went on top, skin side down, and you'd cover the skillet, letting the fish steam cook in the onion's moisture. 10 minutes later, you'd flip it once, letting the flesh side kiss the heat briefly. The fish emerged tender and flaky, infused with onion sweetness, its own mild flavor enhanced rather than masked. Salt and pepper were all the seasoning needed. This dish required skill disguised as simplicity. The timing had to be perfect or the fish dried out. It represented fishing family values, direct, honest, requiring quality execution of basics. Fish pie with mashed potato crust, the British Isles gift to cold weather fishing communities everywhere. From the 1800s through post-World War II, this pie turned small amounts of fish into a meal that felt substantial. You'd poach any white fish, cod, haddock, pollock, in milk with bay leaves and peppercorns until just cooked. The cooking liquid became your sauce base. In a baking dish, the flaked fish mixed with the thickened milk sauce, maybe some peas, hard-boiled eggs if the chicken's produced, and chopped parsley. The magic was the top. Mashed potatoes spread thick and rough across the surface, then brushed with butter and scored with a fork. Into the oven it went until the potato crust turned golden and crispy on the peaks while staying creamy underneath. The crust protected the fish from drying out while adding substance. Breaking through that golden potato barrier into the creamy fish below felt like discovering treasure. This pie stretched one fish into 8 servings, fed surprise guests, and reheated beautifully the next day. Salmon croquettes, the Pacific Northwest's answer to stretching expensive fish into multiple meals. From the 1920s through the 1960s, when canned salmon became affordable, these crispy cylinders appeared on tables across America. You'd drain a can of salmon, flake it fine with a fork, and mix it with mashed potatoes, beaten egg, minced onion, and cracker crumbs. Shape the mixture into small logs or patties, roll them in more crumbs, and fry until deeply golden. The exterior turned shatteringly crisp, while the inside stayed moist and flaky. The salmon's rich flavor concentrated during frying, becoming almost sweet. These croquettes represented kitchen economy. One can of salmon made 6 croquettes, feeding a family for pennies per serving. You could serve them hot for dinner, cold in sandwiches for lunch, or crumbled into salads. They announced culinary competence, the ability to take canned goods and transform them into something that looked homemade and intentional. No one needed to know dinner cost 40 cents. Sardine and egg breakfast fry, the fisherman's high-protein start that cost less than a dime. During the Depression through the 1950s, this breakfast fueled dock workers, boat crews, and cannery laborers through physically demanding days. You'd open a tin of sardines packed in oil, drain off most of the oil into a hot skillet, then add the sardines themselves. With a fork, you'd break them into chunks as they warmed. Eggs cracked directly into the skillet, stirred into the sardines, creating a scrambled mixture that cooked in the sardines' own oil. The eggs turned out rich and slightly fishy, the sardines' smokiness permeating everything. Salt, pepper, hot sauce if you liked heat. Served on toast or with fried potatoes, this breakfast packed enough protein and fat to sustain heavy labor for hours. The omega oils kept your brain sharp. The protein built muscle. It tasted like the working class, direct, functional, unapologetic about its humble origins. Boiled lobster shell broth, the ultimate expression of waste, not cooking. In Maine and maritime Canada from the 1800s through today, lobster wasn't always luxury. When lobsters were so abundant they washed up on beaches and were used as fertilizer, poor families ate them regularly. But even when lobsters became expensive, fishing families kept one tradition: never throw away the shells. After picking all the meat, those shells, the body, legs, and head, went into a pot with cold water, onions, carrots, celery, and bay leaves. Simmered for hours, the shells released their essence, sweet, briny, mineral-rich liquid that tasted more like lobster than lobster meat itself. That broth became the base for fish stews, chowders, or was sipped straight like tea. The shell's calcium and minerals fortified it, creating something nourishing on a cellular level. This broth announced respect for ingredients, understanding that luxury existed even in what others discarded. Today's fancy seafood bisques are just lobster shell broth with cream and a higher price tag. Hominy. This swollen, pearl-white corn looked like something from another planet, but it packed more nutrition punch than regular corn could ever deliver. Mountain families learned hominy making from Cherokee neighbors in the early 1800s, particularly in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. The process involved soaking dried field corn in lye water made from hardwood ashes for days until the hulls loosened and the kernels puffed up like white balloons. Women would carefully pour boiling lye water over dried corn kernels in large iron pots, stirring with wooden paddles as the caustic solution loosened the tough outer shells. After days of soaking and multiple rinses in fresh spring water, the kernels emerged transformed, doubled in size, ghostly white, and tender enough to chew. The finished hominy could be boiled into a hearty porridge, fried crispy in pork fat, or dried again for winter storage. Modern canned hominy is a pale shadow of the hand-processed mountain variety. Apple stack cake. No mountain wedding was complete without this towering testament to community cooperation and Appalachian ingenuity. This wasn't just dessert, it was edible architecture that could feed 50 people. Apple stack cake originated in the 1800s when sugar was expensive and hard to come by in mountain communities. Instead of traditional frosting, this cake relied on dried apples cooked down into a thick, spiced filling that acted as both flavor and mortar between thin cake layers. Each wedding guest would bring a layer, and the bride's family would provide the apple filling made from dried apples, slow-cooked with molasses, cinnamon, and sometimes a splash of moonshine. The cake was assembled like a skyscraper, with 6 to 12 thin layers stacked high and sealed together with the sticky apple mixture. After assembly, the entire cake was wrapped in cloth and left to season for days, allowing the flavors to meld and the layers to soften. The finished product looked like a sweet mountain peak and tasted like concentrated autumn. Squirrel and dumplings. When winter meat supplies ran low, mountain families turned to the abundant squirrels that populated every hollow and ridge. This dish transformed small game into a hearty meal that could stretch to feed unexpected company. Squirrel hunting was a rite of passage for mountain boys, and preparing squirrel and dumplings was considered essential knowledge for mountain wives. The process began with cleaning and jointing 2 or 3 squirrels, then browning the pieces in bacon grease until golden. The meat was covered with water and simmered with wild onions and herbs until tender enough to fall off the bone. Meanwhile, dumplings were made from simple ingredients: flour, salt, and enough water or milk to form a stiff dough that could be rolled thin and cut into strips. These dumplings were dropped into the bubbling squirrel broth, where they puffed up and absorbed the rich, gamey flavor. The finished dish featured tender meat swimming in thick, dumpling-studded gravy that tasted like comfort itself. One pot could feed a family for 2 meals, making it economical as well as delicious. Turtle soup with cornbread. Mountain streams and ponds provided more than just water. They offered protein in the form of snapping turtles that could weigh 20 pounds or more. This wasn't backwoods desperation food. Turtle soup was considered a delicacy that rivaled anything served in fancy city hotels. Catching snapping turtles required courage and skill, as these prehistoric-looking creatures could snap off fingers with their powerful jaws. Once caught, the turtle was cleaned and the meat removed from the shell, revealing surprisingly tender flesh that tasted like a cross between chicken and fish. The preparation was elaborate, befitting its special status. The turtle meat was cut into chunks and slowly simmered with wild onions, herbs, and root vegetables until it fell apart. Some cooks added hard-boiled eggs and a splash of vinegar for tang. The finished soup was thick, rich, and deeply flavorful, served alongside fresh cornbread to soak up every drop. Turtle soup was reserved for special occasions and honored guests, proving that mountain cuisine could rival any city restaurant when ingredients and skill combined. Fried catfish and hush puppies. Mountain streams provided more than just cool water. They were home to whiskered catfish that became the centerpiece of legendary fish fries that brought entire communities together. These weren't delicate trout fishing expeditions. Catching catfish required patience, strong hands, and sometimes the courage to reach into dark holes where big cats lurked. Fresh-caught catfish were cleaned and skinned, revealing firm, white meat that was surprisingly sweet and mild despite the fish's muddy reputation. The fillets were soaked in buttermilk to remove any earthy taste, then dredged in seasoned cornmeal that created a golden, crunchy coating when fried in hot lard. Alongside the fish came hush puppies, cornmeal fritters mixed with chopped onions and dropped by spoonfuls into the same hot fat. Legend says hush puppies got their name from cooks who tossed them to barking dogs with the command, "Hush puppies." The combination of crispy outside, flaky inside catfish with hot, sweet hush puppies created a meal that satisfied both body and soul, proving that mountain cuisine could compete with any coastal seafood. Leather breeches. Don't let the name fool you. These weren't pants, but green beans transformed into leathery strips that could hang from the rafters all winter long. This preservation method turned summer's abundance into winter's sustenance without requiring expensive canning equipment or precious salt. The process began during peak bean season, when mountain gardens produced more fresh beans than families could eat. Young, tender green beans were strung on heavy thread using a large needle, creating long garlands that looked like green necklaces. These bean strings were hung from kitchen rafters, porch ceilings, or attic beams where air could circulate freely around them. Over several weeks, the beans dried into brown, wrinkled strips that rattled like leather when touched, hence the name leather breeches. Come winter, handfuls of the dried beans were soaked overnight to rehydrate, then cooked slowly with fatback or bacon until tender. The finished beans had a concentrated, slightly smoky flavor that fresh beans couldn't match. This ancient preservation method kept families fed with vegetables long after gardens lay buried under snow. Southern beans and cornbread. This wasn't just a meal, it was the foundation of mountain survival, a perfect protein combination that could sustain families through the leanest times. The magic happened when dried beans and cornmeal joined forces, creating a complete protein that rivaled expensive meat in nutritional value. Mountain families grew their own beans, usually tough varieties like pintos or navy beans that could withstand harsh weather and poor soil. These dried beans were soaked overnight, then slow-cooked for hours with a piece of fatback or ham hock until they became creamy and rich. The cooking process was an art form. Too little water, and the beans burned. Too much, and they became watery soup. Meanwhile, cornbread was mixed fresh using stone-ground cornmeal, buttermilk, and a touch of bacon grease. The bread baked in a preheated cast-iron skillet, creating a crusty bottom and tender crumb that was perfect for soaking up bean pot liquor. Together, beans and cornbread provided everything the human body needed to thrive, making this combination the backbone of Appalachian cuisine and the reason mountain families could survive in isolation for generations. Wild greens mess. Spring's arrival in the mountains was announced not by calendars, but by the emergence of wild greens that could save families from scurvy and add fresh vitamins to winter-weary bodies. This wasn't casual salad gathering, it was serious foraging that required extensive knowledge of what was safe to eat and what could kill you. Mountain women passed down identification skills through generations, teaching daughters to recognize pokeweed, lamb's quarters, wild spinach, dandelion greens, and dozens of other edible plants. The gathering expedition was a social event, with women and children spreading across hillsides with baskets, collecting enough greens for immediate eating and drying for later use. The preparation was simple, but crucial. Most wild greens were boiled twice to remove bitterness and potential toxins, then sautéed with bacon grease or fatback for flavor. The finished mess of greens was piled high on plates, providing essential nutrients that had been missing from winter diets of preserved meat and stored grains. This dish represented the deep connection between mountain families and their environment, proving that survival required intimate knowledge of the natural world.